Welcome to Techtastic, where we navigate the intersection of technology and business, uncovering innovations that redefine our world.
Swathi Young, it is so lovely to have you on It's Techtastic. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Kristen.
So you have an interesting role in the world, being that fractional CTO consultant, and it's in a really turbulent time in most companies' technology space as we all try to adjust to AI and how it impacts our business. And the thing I would like to understand from you is, what are you seeing the reaction being? I've had a lot of questions asked of me, but I'm curious, you've got a broader lens.
Yeah, lots of interest, right? So I would categorize broadly into three sectors because I, being a fractional CTO, I have my hand in a couple of different sectors. So one is I'm a CTO for a sustainability startup, Sustain Chain, which was established by United Nations. It's a platform that has an AI engine that's been running for the last 2 years that connects people across sustainability areas, grassroots startups, innovators working in sustainability space. So that's the nonprofit sector, but very, very growing sustainability sector. And the other clientele I have is mostly in public sector, since I'm based out of Washington, D.C. I hear a lot from public sector agencies, as well as some healthcare and fintech commercial clients as well. So I think the most risk averse but curious are the public sector, as it's bound to happen, right? So they're very curious about the use cases, understanding the use cases. And this is a conversation I've been having for 8 years with the public sector leaders, because this was way back like in 2018 or so when I started leading teams to implement traditional machine learning, especially started off with research in lung cancer space. And then started speaking to a lot of CIOs, CTOs in the public sector space, especially Department of Health and Human Services. So they were very curious about the use cases. And obviously nowadays, the conversation is not from traditional ML, but moved on to generative AI. So one thing is about identifying use cases that obviously match with their business goals, because that's most important. And I always lead with business first. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And I'm not going to sprinkle the pixie dust of AI until I understand what are some really hair on fire issues. And then I say, okay, this is something that a generative AI can solve. At the same time, there's a lot of speculation around whether it's responsible AI, or also a lot of security concerns, because the public discourse is that OpenAI is using all these large language models based out of publicly available information, and some not so much. We know that from the New York Times case against OpenAI. But what they really don't know is the enterprise version of the APIs of OpenAI are as secure as your AWS, right? So they will, as any SaaS platform, they will provide you audited security documents. So there's a lot of learning and presentations that I do to demystify that aspect of security. It's not that they are going to get the publicly available, the ChatGPT app. It's more of tapping into the APIs and the powerful use of those APIs. The other thing is obviously around responsible AI, and we are in a great space today that an OpenAI API is not the only option. We have Claude, we have Mistral, we have so many other. Amazon Bedrock provides so many foundational models. So take your pick, Hugging Face if you want open source. So the way I look at it is, in the strategic role, I do a lot of education and advocacy to demystify how, when the rubber meets the road, it's not the ChatGPT window that the enterprises would see. It would be the horsepower of the large language model that they have to leverage and solve their business problems. So in a nutshell, I would say there is apprehension. There is concerns about security and bias, and so those issues that depends on the correct foundational models that you want to leverage, add RAG on top of it. So that's the conversation I'm having. There's a lot of education and advocacy that I'm doing.
It's interesting because you touched on a couple things in there that are really important. The one that I'm really curious about, though, was the UN Sustainability AI piece. I was CTO at TradeLens, which was backed by the UN Asset Initiative, which is their outreach to developing countries to help them build up their infrastructure for supply chains and all that kind of fun stuff.
Mhm.
And I was surprised at how forward-looking that group was.
Mhm.
I tend to think of the public sector as being extremely slow to react.
Right. This one is more of a non-profit, but extremely fast and accelerating space that we are in. So 2 years back, our platform, which is, think of it as a LinkedIn for sustainability, because it's truly, truly connecting different players in the sustainability ecosystem using AI. Although the difference is it's not open to the public, it is by invite only. So we have a lot of startups there. So our first version was a reinforcement learning engine that's a recommendation engine that connects, say, if you're an impact investor in regenerative agriculture, it would connect innovators to the impact investors in working in that specific sustainability area. But this version that we're currently working on and not yet inaugurated, which is under the covers. So if you have any questions, I think we can have another conversation. But just at a very high level, it's how to sort of bring the old machine learning models and integrate it with large language models. That's what we are working on in this next phase.
That is an interesting process to try to figure out. My own company is doing a very similar thing. The benefit of our older way of doing machine learning, we want to bring that forward and pair it with the benefit of modern generative LLMs and that model. And it's not obvious how you end up doing that because they are fundamentally different in their very structure.
Yeah. And I think the use cases where it's very much driven by, is that the right use case to bring them together? Sometimes traditional machine learning works for a particular use case.
More often than not, we keep finding a traditional heuristic works, and there's no reason to throw a large language model at it at all. You mentioned not wanting to sprinkle the pixie dust around, and that's the most common problem I run into is people will say, oh, we tried this, but it only had 50% reliable on its output. Assume there's a human in the loop, right? Checking that. Like, right, you're using it for the wrong thing. It's not magic. It's still technology, and it's only as good as the data that's been trained on. It's only going to be as effective as that. You're asking it to do things outside of that core use case. And that's the moment that I'm worried about because it happens repeatedly with technology. Something comes in, it looks like it solves all of our problems. Everybody gets hyped up about it. We all jump in, and then the realization that it's just new technology, it's not magic, hits, and there's that letdown, and the opportunity that was presented by it gets lost, in that deflation of the hype bubble.
Yeah.
A lot of the companies that traditionally would have been very slow to adapt to something like this jumped right in. Immediately we're saying, yes, let's go. And even so far as doing layoffs in anticipation of being able to eliminate human roles when they hadn't yet figured out how to implement the technology. And so I think we're going to see a rebound very, very soon on that approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would like to say that where we are today, there is yet not a large language model to clean the data for you, right? Even if you use a foundational large language model, take your pick from Hugging Face to Claude to OpenAI. You can take your pick, but it's only going to be as good as your data, and your lineage of data is so important, and the provenance of data is important, and what, the data elements. So there was a very interesting use case that I was talking to somebody from one of the public sector agencies here in Washington, D.C. So they were trying to see that the COVID vaccines and their reach within the United States, and there were so many deserts. There were pockets of geographical areas in the US where there were not many vaccines, right? Vaccines taken or given and so on. So when they were trying to collect the data and do a regression model, these are outliers in the data. And as a data scientist, you have to make a decision what to do with the outliers. And there's a whole technical process around the outliers. But even business-wise, you need to make a decision, whether it's mission for an agency or a nonprofit or a business organization. What do you do with the outliers? And sometimes people often not consider it or take it into account. But in this specific use use case, imagine you're not getting the context, and the deserts of the vaccines are because there is no access to healthcare in general, right? So there are pockets of this country where there is no access to a healthcare in their particular geographical area. So you are losing the context just by eliminating these outliers of data, right? Information resides, and too often we miss the information architecture by looking into the data architecture. So I always emphasize on context of the data and your business processes and processes in general when you're looking. Especially, I think this is a very good example that it's very easy to delete your data and actually remove the outliers, but it has a huge impact. If you're trying to understand what is the impact of people not being given vaccines in this country, then you have to understand these outliers and what's causing it. And similarly, I'm sure you have seen a lot of data that's either corrupted, it's not existent, and sometimes you don't even know the data lineage, which OpenAI itself has a lineage question. And now they're entering into partnerships like News Corp being the latest. But previously, there have been like New York Times actually put a case against them. So data lineage in your organization is so important. And that's the conundrum for a startup. Like Sustain Chain, we are a startup. So initially, you don't have a large amount of data, but we still ran our machine learning engine and continue to run on smaller amount of data. And for that, we are using the reinforcement learning engine. But I think everybody has to make a conscious decision. If you don't have data that you can generate and you're augmenting the data, what do you do about it? That's mostly startups. But in large organizations, you have lots of data, but you have either outliers, corrupted data, missing data, and it's not enough to look at the spreadsheet and or a CSV file and say, okay, this data doesn't matter. There's a rich context behind that.
You reminded me of a particular weird one we ran into with a former company, and that was that the operations team had become reliant on a core set of metrics, and we realized that it wasn't telling them what they thought it was. And so we corrected that, and they asked us to change it back, because even though the new data might have been more useful, it might be more correct, they were measuring their performance and how they were running the business, and people's bonuses were tied to that number. And when we corrected it, all of a sudden, all their numbers tanked. The number was on-time delivery. That was a core metric. And it was like, well, it used to be close to 100% because we effectively were lying to ourselves. We were adjusting that last minute, like, oh, it's not going to be there today. It's going to be there tomorrow at 4 p.m. Even though a month earlier, we were going to say it was going to be there today. We would update the number, overwrite the old data, and then present them with, you're almost always perfect. And all of a sudden, it dropped to like 25% on time. And so people were freaking out. We're like, we can't make it better if we have bad data. If we have bad information, we have bad decisions, and we're incentivizing the wrong things. We actually had to fight that all the way to the CEO, because it was we're not getting better. We're actually getting worse. At least we're updating this number more frequently. That's actually how we figured it out. We started looking at how the rate of change on fields, and went, that shouldn't be updating. That should be persistent. Oh no. So the outliers are where we looked for process improvement opportunities and places to make interesting decisions. That's usually where you find out things aren't perfect.
Exactly. That has been my experience as well. And the other thing, obviously, is a lot of conversations around, you give it different names, ethical AI, responsible AI, or bias in AI. And I had the good fortune of a project I undertook. This was in 2019, and we published it during the pandemic. The fall of 2020 was the ethical AI framework for the US government. So it was a collaborative effort between government, public sector, commercial, and as well as a lot of folks from universities. So it was a very enriching experience. I was leading the bias part of it, and was instrumental in bringing it all together and putting the framework together. So a lot of learnings there. Although it has been 4-5 years since I worked on it, it's been continuous discussions on that topic. And even technology-wise, I look at it two ways, right? For responsible AI, there are things to do outside of technology, whether it's regulation, bringing the right people, whether it's your legal teams, HR teams, into the conversation. And the third thing is, what do you have technology-wise? Even that is under research. If you talk about explainable AI, there are still techniques like LIME, which are still being evaluated and continuously used. And I know right now we are also doing a more what they call the red light testing as well. So that's another hot topic of discussion, and definitely I'm a strong proponent of also what are some of the things you can do outside the technology solutions, whether the diversity in your engineering and data science teams matters. And unlike traditional software, don't leave out your legal, especially if you're in a regulated industry like finance and healthcare. You need to have your legal in the room for any decision making using an AI, even if with a human in the loop. Sometimes, if you're using, whether you're using large language models or deep learning techniques, sometimes the explainability would not be so clear. So those are some things you have to be aware of. And also HR, because to your point about people getting laid off, I don't think in this interim that more people are getting laid off. I think it would be more a hiring freeze, but we do need people, right, to understand. I say that always, that the data scientists and the technology teams do not understand your business process. Even when I was working with the lung cancer surgery department, we had to sit with the lung cancer surgeon even 1 hour or 2 hours of his time to understand the process, right? Because we won't even know how to understand the data if they don't explain it to us. And my team of data scientists, same with the radiologist, we were working on lung cancer CT scans. We had no idea. They had to explain to us, walk through their process completely. So there is a rich domain expertise. And these are some of my friends who are not in the world of technology. They were like, "Oh, Swathi, you're like the AI person in the room. Why don't you go through what should I learn? What certifications?" And I was like, "No, you're underestimating the domain expertise you bring to the table. As a domain expert, if you know the right questions to ask the data scientist, that's the best learning you can do, because the data scientists could do algorithms, but they won't understand the context, the data, the business processes. So I think it's like a two-piece in a pod. They have to work with the business users, domain experts, to make the algorithms relevant."
It's funny because it often comes back to the same lessons we've learned so many other times. Whether it's the constant evolution of AI as we're dealing with right now, ML before it, data science before that, just software development in general.
Yeah.
The first principles of those are the same as they are now. Context matters. Don't expect anybody to make the right decisions first. It's going to be a learning evolution as we go. So plan for obsolescence, plan for mistakes to occur, and be adaptable. And too often, at least in my experience, too often the pushback that you'll get is that sunk cost fallacy kind of baked into the business decisions. We've already paid for it, therefore it has value as it is. Please don't break it. It's like, but it's not doing what you think it is. It's not providing the value you think it is. We need to adapt.
Yeah.
I keep telling people whenever I talk to them, it's like, well, what do you do today? You build software now. What are you doing now? Same thing. New technology, same rules apply. Yes, you're going to have a lot more data scientists in your world now. You're going to have people that are a lot more capable on the data side and understanding it. You need them, but you should have had them anyway. Like with Wayfair, we had a very large BI team that was there largely to help us find where we had inefficiencies and we could resolve it. And then that became our ML teams. And I'm sure now it's the AI type teams. They're the same group. What are they doing? Same thing they were always doing. Where are we inefficient? How can we make it better?
Yeah, and although I think a caveat to that I would add is that, maybe an addendum, is that with ML or even LLMs, it's just not 1 + 1 = 2. With traditional software, it's very rules based, and you are expecting an output based on some rules and that you write in your code. I think the biggest thing is that you have to be very patient for your LLMs to work. Sometimes the observations that the learning could take anywhere between 3 to 6 months. It's not like you're implementing a software in 3 months and you're getting benefits, like you're automating your procurement cycle. That's a software. But whereas you're predicting which of your suppliers will do on-time delivery, that will take some time for it to kick the machine in place by learning the history, making predictions, right? So I think that is one difference. And that's where business leaders who are in a hurry, either to realize the return on investment or to realize even the value of the problem that is trying to solve could take time. Especially, I think, where data is smaller, the time would be longer. Even with large amounts of data, I think it takes some time for the prediction machine to churn and act, optimal levels as expected by businesses.
It's a very good point. The learning aspect of it and the assumption that but we fed it all this data, that there's a feedback loop that has to occur for the training to work.
Yeah.
And that is, did my prediction meet, for example, like the outcome I expected? No. Okay. What happened? Reinforce, continue on.
Right.
Just like you had a person there that had to learn to experience. These magic technologies we keep calling AI are no different than that. They're just faster doing it. They can handle more data.
Or they have had to be in existence for many years, right? So today, when Facebook has 1 billion users, the machine is working really well. We don't know how it was, right? Initial machine, they might not have had even machine learning. So the power of whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook that have machine learning engines at scale is that they have been in business for long. They have been tweaking the algorithms for a long, long time. So if we were any other business or startup has to emulate those, it's going to take them some time to, one, build the data, two, for the training to kick in.
We only have a couple minutes. I just realized that, and I feel like I could sit here and talk to you forever.
Yeah.
And neither one of us has the time for that. So I wanted to give you a couple minutes just to give final thoughts to the audience.
Yeah, the final thoughts are, I think Professor Galloway, for those of you who follow Scott Galloway, said it rightly. It's not AI which will rule the world, but people who know how to use AI will rule the world, right? So I would advocate that whether you're in technology field or not, just bring yourself up to speed with what's happening in AI, or at least just use ChatGPT for everything, even if you're a lawyer or a surgeon, right? I think there is a lot of power in using the technology, exploring the technology, because it's going to be here to stay. The Pandora's box is already open.
Pandora's box is already open, agreed. Absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you, Kristen. It was a pleasure.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Techtastic. I want to thank you personally for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Until then, keep exploring and stay curious. Thank you for listening. If you are new here and enjoyed the content, please subscribe. It really helps us out. And if you are a regular listener, thanks so much for your continued support.
Overwhelmed by tech debt? Discover Vala AI, the solution to tech challenges with the simplicity of a click. No engineering background? No problem. Vala AI enables anyone to effortlessly tackle tech issues, freeing up your time from tech headaches. Make tech debt vanish with Vala AI, where your tech solutions are just a click away.